Chris, can you clear something up for me right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, are you now blocked by Carpe Donktum or not?
Will. So I don't know if you know about this. If you're blocked by Carpe Donktum, that's probably my fault because he blocked. He blocked literally everybody who followed. He blocked me, and then like a bunch of my followers like harassed him to unblock me, and then he unblocked me, and then like ran a blockchain on everyone who follows me. Yeah, it was only a month or so ago. Yeah, that's like one of my long running rivals on the platform there. I think that I got to give him credit. It's sort of a power move to try to deprive me of my audience or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Because I just kept like replying to him nonstop. You know what I'm saying? And but no, I think there's a certain amount of respect there. You know what I'm saying on his part because like in fact he's added me a few times recently when like other people have like tried to like sort of copy my bit like the way I was fucking with him, and then he'll like put my at in there like, hey, this is his bit, he does it way better than you. So
just for my own enjoyment, can you just run back one or two of your greatest hits because I love it.
Oh well, I mean it just started with me telling him I was gonna put him in a diaper or in burp him or something like that, and then it just evolved into this whole bit where like he's my son, and then he due to my negligence he meets all sorts of unfortunate ends in various scenarios.
He respects you though.
He actually called me the Jack Handy of inventing ways to kill him. Actually.
And has he ever DM'd you?
We've exchanged a couple DMs, yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing him and all those other guys in the ilk. I mean, they're already into this thing, but like for the 2020 cycle, coming back to battle in the Great Meme War 2. Well,
when I'll really know I've made it is when I see one of those insane Carpe Donktum videos, and when it's like Trump like shooting someone in the head, but it's got like my Twitter avatar on the body or something. Like that's how I'll know I've really made it.
It's always like some really like obscure movie. I mean, obviously the one his pal did was like some scene in Kingsman. Like it would totally be like one of those movies where like The Rock is like a babysitter or something, and they're just like we love this action scene.
That would actually be perfect for your bit then, Chris, because then you could just reverse it, and if The Rock's the babysitter, you just put your Avi on The Rock, and then Carpe Donktum on the little baby.
Well, Will, I know we got you on to talk about Roger Stone, but I think it'd be remiss if I didn't. You kind of had a front row seat to. I guess what I'd call the greatest show on earth. I don't mean the impeachment. I mean Jacob Ball and Jack Berkman's like bizarre, just incompetent attempts at political rat fucking. You've been to a couple of those press conferences, haven't you?
Yes. So yeah, I have sort of a I don't know if you'd call it a cursed relationship with those two. So I go way back with Jack, back to 2016. So before he teamed up with Jacob Wohl, Jack was kind of a locally known DC goon perhaps, and he got really into Seth Rich stuff, and so from there I knew him from that. And then it was really funny seeing him last year team up with Jacob and then get like super famous or Twitter famous through that relationship. So yeah, I mean I've kind of watched the decline of the Jack Berkman show from like when he was allowed to have things outside of the Roslyn Holiday Inn, the Northern Virginia, and then it was like, okay, like you're kind of gonna get downgraded in terms of the rooms at the Holiday Inn, and then now it's of course out in his driveway.
Well, the funniest part about that, I think it was like the last one or the one before it, when like they kept threatening to remove people, but like the spectators who were like yelling, like they're on the street, like they're on public property.
Yeah,
what are they gonna do?
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of like sometimes when I'm there, because like the kind of the genius of the whole game they play is there's always like one clue that will unravel the entire scheme, and so it's not just like, oh, this guy's a liar. It's like there's one specific thing you can figure out that will like completely discredit this. So like the Elizabeth Warren guy was like a stolen valor dude, essentially, was just like completely lying about his military service. They had a guy after that who I believe I think it was Kamala Harris he claimed to have had an affair with, and then he told told me he had no idea Kamala Harris was a real person. He thought it was a Spike TV show.
Right. Oh, right. I remember reading that. I mean, do you believe that? Because I don't know that I believe that.
I think it's true. I mean, he showed me the emails where it really was like, hey, like, yeah, you're going to be a star, kid, on Spike TV. Now, of course, Spike TV's been off the air for at least a year. So,
yeah, Spike TV's not around anymore, is it?
But really, I mean, I've talked to so many people that they've, roped into these things, the Pete Buttigieg accuser, the Robert Mueller accuser, and they are frankly like often very naive people who just like, one of them, one time I was invited to the first time they had a press conference at Jack's house, and one of these people was very concerned because they thought Jack was going to shoot all the reporters under like castle doctrine. They thought he was going to be like, "Welcome to my house," boom, boom, boom. And I was like, "You can't." That's legally like you're not allowed. And she's like, "I don't know." So I mean, they find these characters.
Does anybody buy into this stuff? Like, I mean, like even on the right, you know what I'm saying? Like you're pretty tuned into like right-wing news ecosystems. Like just everything I see just depicts these two as just the total clowns that they are. But like, do these accusations, these stories get like written up by like some fake Facebook news site, like the Daily Patriot or some shit? Like, do they filter to like insane like MAGA boomer Facebook and then get taken seriously?
Yeah, so definitely like some of the first ones, like the Robert Mueller one and the Buttigieg one, had some legs. But sort of at this point, like Jacob and Jack had become so toxic, like even on the right with many people. But the thing is that like, and
right,
look, I mean, I'm not coming out to these press conferences generally anymore. There's kind of a weird relationship where they're like, Will, like, please come to the press conference, because they want the tweets, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm conscious of that. But at the same time, when people are not actively like knocking these things down, often like the right-wing blogs will just be like, we'll run with it. And so often, you see a lot of like kind of conservative characters being like, "Stop talking about Jacob Bull and Jack Berkman," and it's like because they're giving the game away. Like they're too incompetent. Like if they were just like a smidge more competent at it, I think they would have a lot more success with their smears.
I wonder about like the relationship there that like that you have and other people have, and even to a large extent like the public has, and like when everybody like dunks on them on Twitter or whatever, and whatever latest caper they've put together just like falls apart entirely. And I actually I think about this in terms of Stone as well. Like there's sometimes there's this slight moral apprehension about like, is this giving them the attention they want, right? Like, is this just feeding into the like, I don't know, the whole like, their whole game is to trigger people or whatever and it's not just them, obviously that's a large part of that kind of right-wing media space, but like at the same time, I feel like, especially with like those guys, or to a certain extent like Stone, the like bald-faced stupidity of their like shitty gambits is so funny and so like delegitimizing that it's hard to not. I don't know. The spectacle is so.
Well, I mean, it definitely can be great entertainment. I mean, so like I said, a lot of times when I go to these things, I'm so focused on like figuring out what the lie is. But then when you watch it, like I was watching the video of the Kamala Harris one, and it's really like, I mean, it's like pro wrestling. It's hilarious. Like, I mean, there's like a part where, as you mentioned, there's guys just like yelling and like bang, and Jacob saying, "I'm gonna hit you with the hose" to these people, and then he says there's one guy who's chanting and he's mad at him, and Jacob whispers to the security guard, but it's like a stage whisper, and he's like, "Get rid of that guy, he's creeping me out." And then the security guard's like, "He's on public property, I can't." And Jacob's like, "God damn it," like it's hilarious stuff.
I mean, here's my question, because one thing I'm sitting here trying to figure out is like, this is like the whole point of Eat the Rich, the whole point of the show is to like understand for whom are these acts or actions materially expedient, like who is it benefiting, and like what is with these guys, what is their grift, what is their business model, how do they get paid, and like who are they helping?
Right. I mean, that's the big question, and frankly, like I haven't figured it out. I mean, there was a point where there's like a couple sources of money that I think they can draw on. Like Jack has a good amount of money just from being a lobbyist. Like it seems like his business is faltering somewhat, but I mean, he's just kind of like a moderately rich lobbyist dude. Jacob's dad seems to be a somewhat wealthy attorney. And it's not clear like how much money he's getting from that. But like the larger, like, why are they doing these schemes so relentlessly? Like, are they being paid for it? Whatever. I think that's like the bigger question. I mean, Jacob came up with this business proposal that we got our hands on that was like, I'm going to manipulate the political betting markets by doing little schemes. And so he would like buy, like, you know, let's say he would short sales of Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign or shares. And then he would, you know, he would come out with this marine thing. And the idea is it would tank and he would profit off of it. You know, number one, this is an insane scheme because my understanding is these are not very big markets. You know, it's not like we're talking about like $1 billion. It's like, oh, you made $30. But you're going to prison, you know.
So that's the other question. How is every bit of this not illegal? Like, so like even from the very first one, from the Robert Mueller one, like it seems to me that like forging documents or whatever they did to like accuse the former director of the FBI of rape, like seems like highly illegal and like the type of thing that would get you arrested like immediately. Yeah. And yet he's still going.
Right, totally. I mean, yeah, you would think so. I mean, Jacob obviously is now facing 2 felony charges in California for like unlawful security sales. So that's kind of from his previous life.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, obviously the Mueller thing was supposedly under FBI investigation. So we shall see.
What the fuck? What is this? What is this?
I mean, at a certain point, you imagine, like, especially with those kinds of guys, like, would they not just make more money at this point if they just did, like, a traveling, like, if, you know, they went around with, like, a county fair, and they were just, like,
town
you know,
town
weird carnival.
of rape?
Yeah, like, instead of, like, guess your weight, come here and we'll guess what sexual scandal we're going to accuse you of, and, you know, make, like, $10 a pop or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real, like, there is a showmanship that Jack and Jacob, and I think particularly Jacob has. And, you know, if you look at him sometimes during these things, like, he's cracking up. At this point, he knows it's, like, it's all a joke. But there's something that's driving him, I think, beyond just, like, you know, people say he has a humiliation fetish, stuff like that. But I think there's, like, some larger, like, scheme afoot that I don't think anyone has kind of figured out.
I think that he wants to, like, model himself after, like, his own self-proclaimed hero, Roger Stone. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But he's just so dumb that he goes about it in just the most outlandish and buffoonish ways. Like, I saw this really funny picture. I don't know if you follow Jacob on Instagram, but he posted a picture. You mentioned he was hanging around D.C., like, during the Roger Stone trial. Like, he posted a picture of him and Roger Stone together the other day, and like, the caption was like, they said never meet your heroes, but they were wrong.
I got a personally assigned Stone, a Roger Stone from Roger Stone. You guys have seen that.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
So good. So good.
Yeah, what's the deal with the stones, the signed stones?
Yeah, so I mean, so sort of in the lead up to his trial, he was selling, his legal defense fund was selling, I guess it almost looks like they went to like Home Depot and got what you would make like a garden path with, right? Yes. And he just like, he must have gotten like the cheapest ones because they were selling for like $25-$50, and he would just write like stone, you know, I can't imagine what that big. Stone.
Oh my God.
And then they were selling them. I mean, there's like all this kind of like merch involved in it. I mean, you know, they're very into the Roger Stone did nothing wrong shirts. I mean, there's always like a merchandising opportunity around these kind of various conservative schemes.
What is this?
Please, some listener send us a sack of Roger Stones. Please. I want a Roger Stone so bad.
I actually really would like a Roger Stone, but I don't want me giving Roger Stone money to be contingent on that. Yeah.
Somebody appropriate one of his bags of stones and deliver them post haste.
Under our socialist revolution, we are going to find a socially useful role for the Roger Stone.
Now I was a young boy, about the age of 5. My teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
Hello.
We have Chris.
Howdy, folks.
And we are incredibly honored to have with us the tech and internet reporter of the Daily Beast, as well as the author of the Right Richter newsletter, Will Sommer.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Shane, why don't you kick it off a little bit here?
Yeah, so as you probably heard a little bit in our intro, today we're going to be discussing Roger Stone. Very excited to do so. He's the infamous right-wing political hatchet man, self-proclaimed provocateur, and swinger. Now, a number of our listeners are probably already somewhat familiar with him. He's kind of a notorious character, and there was this pretty interesting film a few years ago that was on Netflix called Get Me Roger Stone that kind of detailed his life and career, kind of portrayed him as this evil Forrest Gump who has had his finger in the heart of every nefarious political action on the right for the last few decades in America. And a little later on in the program, we are going to get into some of the details given his background and where he was really at the height of his career. But oh, how the mighty have fallen. And he's on trial right now. And I believe, actually, isn't the jury is out for verdict as of today, or is it going to be tomorrow?
Yeah, they deliberated today, so and we might get the decision tomorrow.
Okay, so by the time this airs, we might know for sure exactly what's going to be happening to our dear friend. But, Will, I was hoping that we could start off by maybe you just giving our listeners a sort of primer for Stone's trial, what specifically he's been accused of, how the trial has been proceeding, and, maybe what are our chances for our boy?
Yeah. Yeah. Will Roger Stone wriggle out of this one? Okay, yeah, so sure. So as you mentioned, I covered a couple days of the trial. So basically the case boils down to Roger Stone, who was a advisor to the Trump campaign, then left the Trump campaign, and then was sort of still working for the Trump campaign. He's accused of basically obstructing justice by lying to the House Intelligence Committee about their Trump-Russia investigation. It kind of boils down to a couple lies, but basically it's whether he was allegedly a cutout to WikiLeaks. And of course, WikiLeaks had these Russian emails hacked from Hillary Clinton. And so he's accused of lying about kind of a couple things about that, including who his intermediary with WikiLeaks was. Hilariously, it turns out to be Jerome Corsi, kind of the king of birtherism. And then so he claims, oh no, it's just this guy named Randy Credico, who's, the thing we should establish early on is that the kind of cast of characters here is just a very it's sort of oh, I like doing schemes. Do you want to be friends? And they just kind of do schemes together. And so
Chuck Johnson is in the mix here as well, isn't he?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
so he's involved. Steve Bannon obviously is getting some emails here. So and this Randy Credico guy who we'll get into, but he's even the prosecution, he's supposed to be kind of the victim here. And the prosecution's as you'll see, if you want to pin something on somebody, Randy Credico is a good guy for it. So basically, so Roger Stone is accused of then kind of hiding these emails about the WikiLeaks connection, and then essentially threatening Randy Credico and telling him to take the fifth and to sort of not saying anything in an attempt to cover up this Jerome Corsi connection to WikiLeaks. So basically, it's that he obstructed justice. And in terms of the possibility Roger gets out of this, who knows about juries? But I think the sense has been that the prosecution did a pretty solid case. They have a billion emails. This is why you don't lie to people who have intelligence agencies and stuff. This is maybe you can get away with this at the federal, the local grand jury level out. But this is the point. The biggest intelligence case, they're gonna have the emails you sent. Right. So and especially because Jerome Corsi, obviously Mueller knew about him. He was under some pressure. And so now the question is, the jury's deliberating. Is Roger going to get out of this one? I think maybe the best indication of it is that a lot of Roger's closest allies are trying to flood the White House phone lines demanding a pardon. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's not the biggest vote of confidence in Roger's legal defense.
I do really want to talk about the possibility of a pardon, because I think it speaks to not only the just nepotistic corruption that involves all of these guys and Trump, but also the consistent thing in Trump's own career where just all these people feel hey, I'm your friend, and then he just drops them immediately.
Yes.
But I really quickly, one of the details that I wanted to ask about about in regards to the trial is, you know, if anybody out there already knows anything about Roger Stone, the thing you know about him is that he's super flamboyant and he likes to talk. You know, he's been like very flamboyant, to put it politely, on social media, for example, but he's been more or less silent during the actual trial, right?
Right, that's exactly correct. And that, of course, is in part because of the gag order that was imposed on him. You know, he sort of like, as we were talking about with Jacob Wool, it's like one of these guys who it's like, I don't really think that's legal, you know, like what this guy's doing. And so in his case, you know, he was like just talking trash on Twitter and all this stuff, and or on Instagram, because I think he's banned from Twitter. And then eventually he posted like a picture of like the judge in his case with crosshairs or like a target on her face, and the judge was like, well, hey now, that's right. Like, I've been trying to play it cool, but like you can't really do that. So, you know, meanwhile, of course, during this trial at the same time, InfoWars, Roger Stone's best friend, they've been doing this crazy thing where they were like, you know, and obviously they were threatening to sue me over this. So, you know, I got to choose my words carefully here. But essentially, they were convinced that they thought they knew the name of this one juror, and they didn't have the right person. But nevertheless, they put this picture of the person they thought was a juror up like 10 feet high, and then they had the Grim Reaper come out, and they were just like, So, like, I mean, the idea, and then I was like, you know, this is jury intimidation, and they were like, no, it's not. It's about Epstein. The Reaper was just hanging out on set for the next bit, like. I mean, so anyways,
I'm sorry. What is how is it about Epstein? What is their explanation for that?
Well, because the idea was that the next segment was going to be about Hillary Clinton killing Epstein.
Oh, I see. But
nevertheless, they just have this Reaper. I mean, clearly it's like some intern dressed as the Grim Reaper, and then Alex Jones is like, "Come on, bring out the Reaper."
Yeah, didn't he do some whole bit where Jones, where he was talking like from as he often does, he'll take on the persona of the person he's attacking. He was talking about the juror, and he's like, you know, she won't be satisfied until, you know, she hangs Roger Stone and that kind of whole thing, like implying that they're like, you know, it's a witch hunt or whatever, they're out to like execute him or something.
Yeah, I mean, he was saying, oh, she's like a minion of the deep state, all this stuff.
Yes,
and it's sort of like
she's an Obama minion or something.
Right, exactly. And I mean, first of all, this juror, he had the wrong person. This juror then didn't get on the jury in the first place. So it kind of doesn't matter anyway. But, you know, I mean, this idea that sort of like we're going to use our right-wing apparatus to like terrorize people, I mean, I think is very believable.
That's the grift, right? Is like using that propaganda apparatus to curry things in their favor.
Right, and doing it in a way that's like, you know, with so many of these characters, Roger Stone, Alex Jones, in a way that's sort of like bumbling and comical, but like also serious.
Yeah, and sinister, very sinister.
Yeah, it's like we're gonna have this cartoon Grim Reaper come out, but like,
So they're weaponizing their plausible deniability for it. Essentially, they can always fall back on that.
Right, exactly. I mean, you know, it's just like Trump, right? Where like people are saying like, you know, he's too much of a bumbler to like set up a quid pro quo, stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, so the trial has been, you know, it's been an experience. I think they've been, the reviews from the right of Roger Stone's legal defense have been pretty gruesome. They've been saying he needs to get Michael Flynn's lawyer, who, I mean, obviously it's a little too late at this point, but but you know, Michael Flynn's lawyer, who, because famously Flynn he had like some white shoe law firm, fired them after his guilty plea, which, like, you know, not good timing. And then he's like, actually, and then he got some lady who just goes on Fox News all the time and has a book that's called like, you know, like Government Witch Hunt, the Michael Flynn saga. And so the idea that these people are like, you know, that's the lady you want. You know, you gotta get her.
Look, it's hard not to draw a parallel. Maybe there is something to that, because like with Trump using fucking Rudy Giuliani as his lawyer, I think, is there like a recognition that it's not as much of a legal defense as it is in the court of public opinion?
Right, exactly. And you know, there is sort of in a way an advantage to having these lawyers who seem much more focused on the public relations fight and sort of rallying the base. I mean, not to keep bringing up InfoWars, but they're facing all these different lawsuits. Please. And they have these guys who basically just like keep botching discovery, very basic aspects of the law. And then, but to their advantage, that then draws it out. And, you know, some of the people involved in the Seth Rich conspiracy theories, they keep firing their lawyers because their lawyers are saying like, no, like you can't like, look at this guy's like health record, stuff like that. So they'll fire the lawyers, and then of course that adds another 6 months onto the trial. So there is this kind of there is this sort of theatricality going on in a lot of these legal cases.
Speaking of theatricality, like in terms of, as you mentioned before, the sort of like weird cast of characters that are implicated here. I mean, you'd mentioned a little bit before we started recording that like there seems to be a lot of just like, it's like a nexus, this trial of like weird people, both in terms of like a number of right-wing media personalities who are coming to Stone's defense, but also various other members of like Trump's campaign and stuff who have been implicated as witnesses, including...
It's the Burning Man of right-wing grifters. They're all coming out. They're all coming out of D.C. to support their boy.
I really wanted to ask about Steve Bannon, because he was a witness in the trial.
Right, he was. So, and I believe Bannon and Stone have sort of long ago had a falling out. So, because, there's just so many different, like, schemes here. It's kind of like, I believe... Chuck Johnson and Roger Stone had a falling out over control of Bill Clinton's supposed love child. That it was like,
I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm sure you remember this. I was thinking earlier today. Do you remember those text messages that Chuck Johnson posted between him and Roger Stone?
Yes.
Where Chuck Johnson, like, he sent the picture of, like, a bunch of stacks of $100 bills, like, to Roger Stone through text messages, and said, like, "I'm gonna bury you, old man."
Yeah, he said, like, "I'm gonna bury you, you old bitch," or something.
Yeah. Then Roger Stone's like message back was like, "You little bitch." Like people with money don't brag about having money. You ain't got shit, And then like said you're gonna sleep with the fishes.
Yeah, exactly.
Just the most limp-wristed, just slap fight I've ever seen. It's so funny.
And then, of course, just like posting it on Facebook because they haven't been banned from Twitter. They've been banned from Twitter.
And it's also like, imagine being Chuck Johnson and posting that and thinking that it doesn't make you look bad. Like you don't look like a dipshit.
Yeah, this guy who's like 70 is like, shut up, twerp.
Who would have thought that they would have tumultuous interpersonal relationships inside of the fucking viper pit?
Well, that's kind of what makes this beat so exciting in many ways, is that like these people are constantly, just sort of more broadly, just constantly betraying one another. And there is this feeling, and I think understandably so, that there can only be so many grifters. And so that they're constantly like, this motherfucker got a job at One American News. Like, I've got to take him out. Like, that kind of stuff.
It's like Highlander.
Yeah, no, exactly. So getting back to the cast of characters, I mean, you have, and I'm not sure how many of these people have specifically come to the trial, but clearly they're in town for it. So there's Milo Yiannopoulos, of course, who now is kind of, his career is kind of on the skids.
He's also most recently joined the Wall and Berkman show.
That's right.
Yes, exactly, for a particularly grim performance.
So good.
He's sitting there in their driveway with them, and someone says, they were like, "Wait, why is Milo here?" And then Jacob's like, "We're not answering that right
now." It's the lamest star power you could get.
What is he just like was he a statue there? Was he just there for the...
He just sat in the chair drinking wine, as far as I could see.
And checking his phone.
Easiest $20 he ever made.
Yes, exactly.
God knows he needs it.
I mean, in fairness, that scene was like a visually and aesthetically extremely interesting scene. It was fucking bizarre. It looked like, I think I tweeted about it, looked like a John Hughes movie scene.
Well, no, I've said repeatedly that the Wall and Berkman thing, it's like someone needs to, like the Coen brothers need to make a movie based on those two.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely.
But two right-wing grifters just bumbling their way into prison.
So Milo's been there. Roger Stone has kind of like Roger Stone has inspired a lot of these characters. Obviously, Wool, Laura Loomer is a big acolyte of his. Mm-hmm. But the one who maybe is most like him is this fellow named Jacob Angles. Who kind of is described as Roger Stone's mini-me. He does a lot of kind of like little political tricks around Florida. So he's a colorful character. He's been around. Enrique Terrio, the head of the Proud Boys, has been in town. But speaking of the Proud Boys founder Gavin McInnes, of course, also co-founder of Vice, he's been rolling with Milo at this thing. And Gavin apparently came to the courthouse with a bone to pick with me, I guess. So he kept sort of trying to encounter me in the courthouse, but it turns out you can't really like get in brawls with people at federal courthouses. So there was one point where I was like going through security, and then he came in, like I was through the machine, and then he kind of came in and was like trying to like, hey Will, like how's the hate beat? And I was like, I don't know, it's my job, I guess.
Why don't you tell me?
Yeah, and then so he's kind of like heckling me, and then I just like go through, like I just, all right, see you later. And then I ran into him in the courthouse later, and he was just like, the real issue is like, you write too much about like people on the right. Why aren't you writing about like Al Qaeda? And I was like,
What?
I was like, I don't know. I think other people do that. Like, and then he was just like, really getting up in my face and be like, oh, you're a pussy or whatever, kind of trying to like get, tangle with me. And, that's not, I'm not going to, throw fists, I guess.
His best plan was that he was hoping for you to scrap with him in a federal courthouse.
I mean, he was really getting into it with me. He was just like, get over here. And I was just like, all right, well, see you later. Like, we're in like
see you at the next trial.
We're in like the court clerk's office. Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm just like idly just like checking up court files. And he's just like, yo, like, get over here. So, he obviously famously quit the Proud Boys as soon as some of them got charged.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Who would have thought founding a violent street gang would make him look bad, and it would be something he'd want to distance himself from?
It's like, wait a minute. So things have. I guess the way to sum it up is there has certainly been a lot of colorful characters, and sort of famously, while I believe Gavin and Milo and Roger Stone were having lunch around the trial, someone came up and poured water on them. And so it's been, it's been a hot time in DC, for all these characters.
Yeah, I was paying hyper close attention because I like saw that tweet maybe 7 minutes after she had initially posted it or something, and followed it intently.
Yes, it was, and of course they love it because then they can, they're like, Antifa got us.
It was like a woman like sitting with her mother or something like that, and she was just like,
her grandmother.
Imagine having to explain to your grandmother, just like sitting there being like, look at those guys.
Yeah, like, yo, grandma, give me a sec.
Yeah, this is really important.
Am I wrong, or did I remember them being dressed as like Night at the Roxbury or something like that? Like they were wearing like suits and turtlenecks or something.
They've been like, there have been like some serious looks. I think they were. I think there was like one day. There's been at least one day where they were either wearing, I think it was like blue shirts and like pink ties. It was like all like pink tie crew.
They're matching together.
Well, certainly Gavin and Milo were one day. I gotta say, because Roger Stone is like a big fashion guy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
like,
he's a dandy.
He
He fancies himself a dandy.
Yeah.
Exactly, and also like very like fancies himself a dandy if he was in like Bugsy Siegel's gang.
Yeah, he's a dandy from like 1920. He wears like zoot suits and shit.
He's got like spats and pinstripe suits and shit.
But everybody always, like, when people talk about Roger Stone, they talk about him as like the most fashionable man in right wing politics or something. But like every time you look at him, he looks like a fucking clown.
Right.
He looks like the suits, like he's dressed like the Penguin or something, and he's like
I was
absurd.
gonna say the Penguin from the '60s Batman.
Oh, exactly.
But his face, it's kind of weird. I mean, I don't know if they're caps or dentures or something, and the plugs, that's not his hair, surely.
Oh, the plugs are fantastic.
Yeah, he looks like, at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where the Nazi drinks from the wrong cup, and he's like, you've chosen poorly. But like only like 3 seconds into him mummifying in front of the other Nazi, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Just right at that moment, like a few frames in, that's where Roger Stone is at.
I don't know if you guys have ever read Roger Stone's 10 Best and Worst Dressed of the Year, but it's always a fascinating document. So every year he comes out with who he thinks dresses the worst, who dresses the best. And it's always this like crazy like log rolling, because it's always like some random CNN booker who like likes him, and he's just like, this guy's got style.
Oh, God.
I want to circle back a little bit back to the prospect of a pardon, because I have seen this crop up a little bit on in MAGA spaces on Twitter and stuff, and people talking about it because Stone is pretty popular from what I can gather within Trump's base, and so there's this expectation of like, hey, unlike a couple of the other again fallen as we'll say from Trump's esteemed like cabinet and campaign, like Stone seems to be particularly popular with them. And of course, like, given Trump's past behavior and in general, like, lack of the ability to feel empathy, it seems unlikely that he would issue a pardon, right?
Well, I mean, it's hard to tell, right? I mean, I think that's a good point that he certainly has a bigger personality, bigger name recognition with the base than, someone like Paul Manafort, or especially someone like Rick Gates, or like, these kind of random, like that random like European like banker dude or like lawyer guy who got caught up in it and stuff like that, or like George Papadopoulos.
God.
So, I mean, certainly there is a sense of like, how could you let this happen to Roger Stone? Especially because, if you buy the government's case, I mean, this is a guy who's in trouble for lying to protect Trump. So,
right, exactly, yeah.
So, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, obviously, like, one of the big theories about all these crazy pardons he's been handing out is that he's sort of just he's kind of preparing the ground for more kind of specifically self-interested pardons, right? So he pardons or there's another term there, or commutes the sentence of, it's like whether it be Dinesh D'Souza, Joe Arpaio, I believe there's a couple I'm missing, but real like, yeah. So I mean, is it possible? I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. I mean, maybe not in an election year or that close to one, but maybe, if in 2021, it's looking pretty grim for Roger Stone, honestly. If you look at the evidence and stuff, I mean, I think that they got him pretty dead to rights because there's all these emails and stuff, and he says he didn't have any emails. So, I wouldn't rule out the possibility.
He's not a very young man, too. Is he in like his late 60s or something?
He's 67, I believe.
Wow. God, he looks worse.
He looks like shit. he does.
He really does.
In fact, I mentioned earlier that picture that Jacob Wall posted of the two of them the other day, and Roger's not looking so good.
I didn't know if it was like he was older.
He looks like the trial's been weighing on him. He looks like he's been maybe drinking quite a bit. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there was this whole thing where the first day of the trial he claimed he had food poisoning.
Right.
And I will say he was looking pretty rough. He was. And I wasn't sure if they were going to do some scheme where they were like, you can't send this old man to jail. But I mean, it was almost like, it was sort of like, yeah, go home, dude. There was a point where the janitor showed up to the bathroom and was like, I hear I've got something to clean up. And it was like, the janitor shouldn't be saying this. It's like, have a little discretion.
I mean, what's the logical conclusion? Was that he was like wrought with anxiety and he was like puking his guts out, just like.
I mean, you could certainly imagine. Yeah, I mean, he claimed he had food poisoning, but yeah, I mean, it's so I kind of thought that was going to play a bigger role in the trial, but. It was a very weird trial. There was a point where on the first day of jury selection, someone had a seizure in the courtroom. I mean, it was really crazy. Like, this guy just like moaned. It was like a haunted house moan, and he was just like kind of like flailing all over the courtroom, and everyone was like, "What the heck?"
Jesus Christ!
And so obviously we all kind of came into this expecting some sort of like dirty tricks, but I mean, it doesn't seem to have been deliberate. But everyone was like, oh boy. So it's certainly been a weird experience.
I mean, speaking of dirty tricks, given Stone's kind of history, and also like not just the fact that he's been involved in these things, but the fact that he relishes them so much, and as I mentioned before, there's that documentary of him where he's so proud, and that's sort of part of his performance, right? Is like having this intense pride in being a dirty trickster and a provocateur and all of these sorts of things. Like there definitely was a sense a few years ago, especially during the ascension of Trump, right, and during the election season, like that this sort of politics was reaching its zenith, right? Like this kind of like dirty showmanship and total disinhibition and disregard for like rules of conduct and norms and stuff, or like that was going to be on the ascent. But it does seem, and you probably have a better sense of this pulse, Will, like, is that on the wane? Is this trial like an indication of that, or is this just like a blip in one sad old man's career?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, certainly I think that we're kind of sort of entering a world of maybe like a new kind of dirty trick. Getting back to that Roger Stone documentary, I mean, it's on Netflix, Get Me Roger Stone. As you mentioned, the kind of the fascinating thing about Roger Stone, or maybe the irritating thing, depending on your point of view, is how it's sort of like that Ricky Gervais movie, The Invention of Lying, where he's sort of like, I invented lying, aren't I clever?
Right.
And it's like, well, it's like the rest of us didn't want to be like reviled. It's like, we thought it was wrong to do schemes. And he's like, I'm so smart. It was like, we knew we could lie, about everything.
Right.
But, so I mean, basically, like, I think that, like, for example, in 2018, we saw, like, Roger's protege, Jacob Angles. He went down to Broward County, and this was during the Andrew Gillum gubernatorial campaign. And so it seems like Ron DeSantis would have won that anyway, but this is where they did like the big like stop the steal, and it was like an echo of Roger Stone, who organized the Brooks Brothers riot, right, in the 2000 thing. So I think these kind of schemes, and certainly to the extent that they can get traction in the right wing media and get on Fox News, I think are very much still a thing. I mean, I think Roger Stone has kind of been sidelined, obviously, by this trial, but I think unfortunately there's a whole new generation. I mean, we saw with James O'Keefe is like a dude who's very much out there doing schemes like constantly, and so and oftentimes, I mean, these things, there's not even so much of a successful scheme. He just needs like something. He had this CNN insider who supposedly had footage, and it turned out to just be like, oh yeah, like one person, like the camera guy at CNN was upset when Trump won, and he's like, these people are biased, right. And then you can just put it on Fox News and kind of go from there. So I mean, I think it's changed in many ways, but I think that those kind of dirty tricks are still like very much like in the mix.
What it seems to me is like the only currency that these guys have is always doing something, like always doing something. And like their only kryptonite is like obscurity. So that gives them the license to just do whatever it takes, like stand on a fucking stairwell in a driveway.
I believe that's in his own words from that documentary. Roger Stone even says that I think he recognizes that himself, that he says it's better to be infamous than to not be famous at all or to not be known at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, and of course, this is part of what has tripped Roger Stone up in the trial is his need to brag about his schemes even while he's doing them. So like they have, he's like, I didn't talk to WikiLeaks. And then he has, or I didn't know what was coming from WikiLeaks. And then they show video from like the Florida Republican Party where he's like, I know all about WikiLeaks. I've got a man on the inside. and so kind of just going back and forth with this, like, there's all these things where he was like, I would just say like next week, there's going to be a big surprise for Hillary Clinton from WikiLeaks. And then he's like, no, not me. I wasn't doing it. And at the same time, like kind of these acolytes of Roger Stone, Laura Loomer, Milo Yiannopoulos, they have to keep saying in the news too. And so this is where I think one of my kind of like the interesting dynamics you can watch with these figures is especially when they get banned from social media, because the cost of like causing trouble on social media is relatively low. So like in Milo's case, you can just tweet something rude at Leslie Jones. Right. But once you're banned, then you have to like go do physical stunts. And that gets a lot trickier. You
have to chain yourself to the door of the Twitter headquarters.
Right, exactly. So, for example...
I was there for that, by the way.
Incredible. Were you the one who locked her? Were you helping out?
It was absolutely fucking bizarre. It was like 15 minutes after...
You never told me this.
Yeah, dude, yeah. No, it was like 15 minutes after it happened, I jumped on the subway and went there, and it was...
I have to see this.
It was like... Yeah, I was like, there was nothing to do. Like, I had an hour, so I was like, fuck it, why wouldn't I go see this? And it was very weird and very cold. And she wasn't even wearing she must have been freezing, man.
Oh, I'm sure. So yeah, so this is the difficulty you run into, is that you have to kind of, for these people who don't sort of have any other thing to do besides just like be notorious, you have to keep creating this energy and getting in the news, but at the same time you're kind of sabotaging your credibility even on the right by doing these stunts. So like Jacob Wolf, for example, is doing these things that at the same time make him more toxic for like more establishment or more careerist Republicans. So there's this like very like they're always like, oh well, we're trending on Twitter, but that doesn't like really turn into a lasting thing for them to work off.
This cloud shit is funny to me.
What an extremely weird and totally bizarre story, Will, that I can't believe that you have the fortune to cover. It's absolutely bizarre, and I'm glad that you're the one that's doing it, because good God. And super thrilled that you're able to join us. I really, really appreciate that you were able to come on. It's an honor, honestly.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thanks for having me on. It was great talking to the audience and meeting y'all and talking.
Pleasure.
Where can people subscribe to your newsletter? Again, I'm a huge fan of the Wright Richter newsletter.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so it's wrightrichter.com. Richter like like the Richter scale. We're kind of trying to keep an eye on what's going on the right. And that'll take you to the newsletter page. I'm on Twitter at Will Sommer, SOMMER. And then my writing's on the Daily Beast a couple times a week.
Fantastic. Let me just say that if you're as obsessed with QAnon weirdos as I am, please check out the Right Richter, man. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Well, great. Thank you very much.
Really cool that Will joined us for that, though. It's fucking interesting.
Oh, it was so good. That full hour, the hour flew by.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, too, like I've been thinking about this a lot because the dichotomy that we see between the persona and the discourse that we have around Roger Stone, oh, what a joke, what a weird guy and whatever. And then looking into, which we'll get into in a minute, like looking into the actual background of this complete psycho is two totally different things. Maybe that's his shtick now. It's like he's just done a very good job of normalizing things. But it's something obviously we've been talking about doing this this show for a while, and I think it's kind of important. Something I've been thinking about in preparation for this is like kind of getting to this conclusion up front, because I think it's important for us to set the stage and the context of what role Roger Stone plays in a capitalist political economy, right? Because, like we were saying before, what is in his, or anybody that plays a role like his, in his material interest, or in the material interest of his benefactor.
Exactly.
So this episode is different because unlike a lot of the people we've talked about on the show who literally are capital, right, who literally have the capital, are the owners of production, Roger Stone is something we like to call the agent of capital. He's an agent of capital. And I was thinking about it. I was like, how can I turn this into an allegory? How can I explain this? But he's like a barnacle on the hull of capital.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like rhinoceroses will have like those birds that are on them and like sit on their back and like eat the flies that are attracted to its stink and shit. He's that. He is a man that makes his living greasing the wheels so that capital can more efficiently win the war of capital and labor. Because capital is looking to seize control of the only entity that can keep them in check through a legal process, that is, which is government. So capital will always seek to control government because government levies taxes and regulates industry. Both things that are fucking kryptonite to capital. And both of those things obviously more importantly benefit labor, which is the only entity from which capital derives its benefit. And Roger Stone represents, as we've talked about, like frankly a different era of American politics because A, he is that old, but he also leverages the principles that are as salient today as they were back then, as shown like in Jacob Wall and whatnot. So there's a term, I don't think I came up with this term, and I don't know if anybody else came up with it, but we used it a bunch on this show. And in fact, Will alluded to it earlier, and I'd like to formally introduce it, which is what I like to call the apparatus. Because like capital doesn't just operate just like in corporations or hedge funds or banks. The only thing that allows them to run as inefficiently and chaotically as they do is the apparatus that supports them. Mm-hmm. So like, what does this apparatus look like? What do I mean by when I say that? For instance, monetary policy, controlled by the Federal Reserve. It adjusts interest rates and allows companies to receive cash flow at reasonable rates from investors. Or establishment politicians like Nancy Pelosi and Paul Ryan, etc. They work for capital within government to ease the two things that I mentioned before, the regulation and the taxation, and ensure an easy path for their business models. Here's another good one that I really like to point out. The United States Navy secures important trade routes around the world so that global shipping can take place uninterrupted. So think like the Navy's response to piracy in the Gulf of Aden and stuff like that.
Or the South China Seas.
Exactly. Or the intelligence communities that actively squash leftist populist movements within client states. Think what the fuck is going on with Bolivia. The fact that Bolivia's main exports are lithium, which are integral to electronics companies. So then we get to like Roger Stone and his role, which is in the apparatus, which is lobbying and power brokering, right? So all of these are aspects of what the apparatus is that upholds capital. All of this comprises the apparatus that enables capital to do what they do best, which is create economic instability, which they use to further consolidate wealth during a crash to a smaller and smaller and smaller percentage of people, and especially extract as much value out of you, labor, unless you're rich, in which case you're probably not listening to us.
Wait, why are you listening?
Yeah, exactly.
Get off. Stop listening.
Unless you are rich, in which case we'd love to interview you. We would love to interview an extremely rich person. Just throwing that out there.
You're not speaking for all of us when you say
and
that.
Don't. Well,
Please, if you're rich, if you make more money than me, keep your eyes down. Do not make eye contact. Pass me by on the street.
And Venmo us. Venmo us.
Yeah.
Or come on, Eat the Rich. If you know that scene in The Dark Knight Rises with the fucking scarecrow where they put you on trial for your like crimes against the working class, it might be a bit like that. I mean, well, it's winter coming up, so I don't know what the state of the East River is, how like frozen over it. You know what? We'll work on this. We'll work on this.
We'll work out the details.
The point is, Roger Stone's role in the apparatus of capital is one that greases the wheels of lobbying and power brokering, which I think we should get into now, and seeing some of his just fucking horrific misdeeds in the past with his lobbying efforts. So guys, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I think even before getting into the lobbying itself, it's maybe important to talk, and hopefully you can shed some light a little bit more on this. For me and for us and for the listeners, Dwight, is Roger Stone's effect on political spending, through the organization he had in the 70s, which is NCPAC, so the National Conservative Political Action Committee, and a lot of this stems back from 1974. Coming out of the Nixon years, there were these amendments made to the Federal Election Campaign Act, limits on campaign spending and donations and stuff like that, and the creation of the Federal Election Commission to try to restrict the enormous amounts of money and corruption and buying favor and stuff that was going on in politics. And so immediately once these amendments are passed, there's a lawsuit brought in 1976 by Senator James Buckley of New York, who was actually the brother of William F. Buckley. So he sues, and he's trying to get these limits on spending and everything struck down, and the Supreme Court does that. It upholds a lot of the amendments, but the main one that it strikes down, the Supreme Court, is the limits on spending by so-called independent expenditures. In other words, money spent by individuals or outside groups, as long as they're totally independent of the campaigns. And it's immediately on the heels of this. It's in this atmosphere that Roger Stone and his business partners Terry Dolan and Charles Black, they've just the previous year created this political action committee called the National Conservative Political Action Committee, and they immediately start raising just absolutely enormous sums of money, to be used as attack ads, mostly television commercials and direct mailers and all sorts of like we talked about with Will, just sleazy, dirty tricks type stuff, which it really, really in a way pioneered this. You know what I'm saying? Like pioneered these like dirty television attack ads, and they're spending enormous sums of money on all of these Republican campaigns. They spent in 1980, they spent $1.2 million in the 1980 election, just relentless running these attack ads on 6 long-term Democratic senators, 4 of which would go on to lose. Senator Clark of Iowa, George McGovern famously, and Frank Church as well. Some of them were notable ones. Frank Church of the Church Commission, and then
just for the record.
Go ahead.
Just for the record, sorry. One of my favorite websites that I'm on more frequently than I care to admit is the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, their CPI inflation calculator.
Yeah.
So to see what is $1.2 million in 1980 in today's buying power, and it's $4 million.
Yeah. So they spend $1.2 million in 1980. They spend an additional $2 million opposing Walter Mondale in 1984. But and none of this may sound too crazy, but I mean this was really a turning point in the way money gets spent in politics. At the end of 1974, for instance, there were 600 registered political action committees in the country. By 1983, there were 3,500 of them.
Wow.
In 1976, political action committees spent $23 million on congressional races. Just a few years later, by 1982, that number was $80 million. And a lot of this,
Jesus,
a lot of this stems from the Buckley decision, the Supreme Court decision that struck down parts of the limits on spending on independent expenditures. What's notable about that is that the Citizens United verdict as well was heavily based on the same Buckley decision back from the 70s. Like this was sort of the moment where the nature of spending in political action committees and stuff changed in American politics, largely obviously for the worse. And Stone was a pioneer of this and was in it from the start. along with, like I said, Terry Dolan and Charles Black, who would go on to found, along with Manafort and Roger Stone, the lobbying company that they had in the 80s.
Just a quick thing about Charles Black, because I do have a little bit of it on him. He is similar to Stone in the same milieu, and obviously then later founding the lobbying group with him. He said in a New York Times interview that when he fell in love with politics, his words was when he was working on the presidential campaign of Barry Goldwater in 1964.
That's the same thing. That's the same thing Roger Stone said. Roger Stone, he traces it back to reading The Conscience of a Conservative, Barry Goldwater's book, like when he was a boy. Like that was what made him a convert to conservative politics.
And just as a quick, very extremely brief primer to any of our listeners who might not be aware, notorious racist. Notorious racist.
Literally the number one thing he's known for.
Yes, exactly.
Loves racism.
And so I mean, when I say notorious racist and you say conscious of a conservative in the same sentence, reader, it's up to you to decide.
Dear listener.
Yeah, or listener. Should I take that again?
No second takes.
No second takes. All right. Yeah, so, after their formation, as Chris was just lining out, of this idea of what a political action committee can be, and obviously the various long-term effects we felt of that, they also moved into lobbying for international governments. And this was in the 1980, it was Black, Manafort, and Stone who founded this lobbying group that was known as Black, Manafort, and Stone, and then later Kelly when they got an additional partner on board. And, they did
Machine Gun Kelly.
Yes. Peter Kelly. But they did similar kind of, dirty trickster work for domestic politics. They worked with, and their whole appeal was the fact that they had been privy to and in the same milieu as all of these ascendant Republicans in the 70s and the 80s. And that was really what they were peddling.
Yeah, and that's what's so despicable about it as well, is to, literally, to first make your fortune by, campaigning and spending a ton of money to get these people elected, and then, as soon as they get elected, as soon as these people that you helped get in power, to then get into lobbying, you know what I'm saying, to lobbying these same people that you just helped get elected, and then...
Right, exactly. Right. I mean, this is one of the terms that's often thrown around here, and it's very apt, is revolving door.
Yes.
Yeah. Where, you work on one hand to get certain people elected, and then you can claim on your CV, it's well, I have a special connection to them, right? And that's what you're peddling. That's the value. That is lobbying in a crux. It's right. It's I have a connection to somebody in power who, as Dwight was pointing out, can maneuver all of these, capital nuances, and so I can work for your company in order to make sure that, we, lower tax rates or deregulate some industry or whatever. And that's usually what we think of as in terms of lobbying, which on its own is already, scummy, right? That's already, a certain level,
to say the least,
of morally, dubious behavior, even though it's technically legal. But where Black, Manafort, and Stone kind of really, made their own mark is they were part of what eventually became known as the torture lobby in Washington. The torture lobby, or the torturers lobby, came out of this report that was done on how certain lobbying groups in Washington, D.C. peddle their influence among various D.C. politicians to dictators around the world and foreign governments in order to then, grease the wheels a little bit and make certain connections for certain particular kinds of concessions. And so this report originally came out in the 90s, and it became very notorious. In fact, it was one of the things that has been pointed to a number of times, particularly with Stone, but again with Manafort and a few of these other characters, one of the bad media moments of their career to be stuck with that label. So boo-hoo for them. But it's a pretty interesting report. It covers, they were not the only lobbying group that was involved in this. There were a number of them, and of course a whole host of different foreign governments. But in particular, Black, Manafort, and Stone were very active in Africa, specifically Kenya and Nigeria. And what the report details is how these countries were lobbying for what, right? This comes back to this question that we've approached a number of times on the show, which is input, output. How much money do you put into something versus how much you get out? And so effectively what they were lobbying for was government aid, just huge aid packages. Now, of course, the United States and other Western nations usually are involved in very various types of aid packages, but, for all of their various problems, and I'm not going to, stand for, how that aid is mitigated, but usually there's this, nominal idea put forth via, the provisions in the UN that, if you're going to receive aid if you can abide by certain rules. And a lot of them are really fucked up, but one of them is, human rights abuses, right? So the idea is that, if we can effectively prove that your government is committing human rights abuses, we're not going to send you the aid. That's the, basic kind of liberal idea of the formula. So the point of these lobbying groups, and in particular, again, Black Manafort and Stone, was to get around that and basically pay these guys exorbitant amounts of money to put pressure on presidential administrations. At the time, we're talking about Reagan and George H.W. Bush in the sort of mid to late 80s and then the early 90s.
You would think that Reagan wouldn't need much pressure to help to aid.
Yeah, I know, right?
To aid human rights violating dictatorships.
I mean, that's the kind of focus point of this report. I mean, obviously there are a lot of other things at play, and part of lobbying on behalf of foreign governments, which is obviously a practice that we've stopped generally as a country, and there's no concerns about it today. But part of lobbying on behalf of foreign governments is not simply to get around those things, but also to just get your foot in the door, right? Make your country a priority, right? So here's just a little clip from this report. Last year, and this report came out
91.
Exact date. 91. Right. I was going to say 91, 92. So last year, Kenya received $38 million in U.S. foreign aid and spent over $1.4 million on Washington lobbyists to get it.
Not a bad return.
I believe the exact figure that went specifically to Black Manafort and Stone was 660,000. So about half of that went just to them.
Nigeria received $8.3 million and expended in excess of $2.5 million. So a little worse return.
Still,
and again, 1 million of that went specifically to Black Manafort and Stone.
3.5, 4 times.
So whom did both countries call upon to do their bidding for the U.S. government? Lobbying firm of Black Manafort and Stone, and then it gives the figures that Chris just gave.
Oh, yeah.
Foreign Reagan political operative Paul Manafort oversees foreign accounts. His partner, Charles R. Black, was a senior political strategist in the 92 Bush Quayle campaign. Rest in peace.
This name, Paul Manafort, keeps coming up. Whatever happened to that guy?
He's fine.
He's keeping a bed warm for Stone as we speak.
He's fine. He's pulling apart the fibers of his government-issued pillow to make a new toupee.
So their firm's fees to represent Nigeria, Kenya, the Philippines, and Angola's UNITA rebel group in 91 totaled more than $3 million. All four receive U.S. aid and abuse human rights. A spokeswoman for Black Manafort, Stone, and Kelly told the center that the firm does not, quote, attempt to explain away, unquote, concerns about human rights. Instead, she said, we try to open a dialogue.
Oh, is that a Democrat?
Yeah, we got to reach across the aisle to these tin pot dictators who are committing human rights abuses.
Well, you got to hear them out.
So one of the details that's not super gone over in the report, but it generally gets at the gist of it, is Kenya was one of the sponsored governments by Black Manafort and Stone, particularly the President Moi at the time, the dictator of Kenya. And, during this time, it's a question of okay, so what are they spending that money on? What exactly they're trying to do? So in 1984, the Moi government in Kenya was responsible for what was called the Wagala massacre, in which 5,000 men were taken and executed for being ethnic Somalis.
Jesus.
So just a little minor act of genocide on behalf of this particular government. And this is among the kinds of things that, spending a few $1 million on a lobbying group who has nice connections in Washington can help you cover up. So this gives you a little sense of who the company these guys were keeping in and the money that they were receiving from them. Now, in terms of the money, and this is the other thing that I want to get into, Black Manafort and Stone, by the way, continued to operate after this report came out. Eventually, they were merged with another lobbying group in the 90s, and, the plucky heroes of our story all kind of went their separate ways, or faded into obscurity, if you like. But the question is, again, what role do they serve? And this is what Dwight was getting at. So they act as middlemen between these various countries in order to create pressure, right, to take the eyes off of particular human rights abuses. And in exchange for that, they get an exorbitant amount of money, and then in return, the government presumably gets a certain aid package, which then can offset, you could think of it like an investment. And so, millions of dollars were basically funneled into this particular lobbying firm that Stone was a founder of. And what I find particularly interesting about this is Stone, the term you used, Dwight, is like this idea of like the apparatus. And I think another way to think of that is the friends of power, right? Because we talk about like the people who are in power a lot in this show. And these really are the friends of power, the people who associate with power, but don't necessarily have it themselves. They're in these little in-between spaces of all these kinds of shady deals. And so what do they get out of it? Now, I was trying very desperately to find Roger Stone's net worth.
Me too, dude, me too.
And
he claims to be broke, but I'm not sure how much I believe
that. That's the thing. He claims to be broke now.
But again, Paul Manafort was supposed to not have money, but he was just hiding it in fucking Switzerland or whatever.
Yeah. Right. And so is there another element of this channel of dealing with a variety of shady authoritarian governments in the world where then hey, as just a security as well, can I stash some money in your central bank or something? Can I hide my finances and assets across all of these various things? So that's part of where the connection thread comes in. But looking at him as a particular individual, Roger Stone, right? I saw varying reports that said he was at least certainly at different points in the 80s and 90s worth several $1 million, which would scan because he was involved in a plurality of deals just alone with these nefarious foreign governments to receive millions of dollars.
And that's not even getting into, they lobbied on behalf of the tobacco industry and all sorts of domestic concerns as well.
Right, exactly. They did all kinds of domestic activities as well, which I'm sure they were handsomely paid for. But the most recent figure I could see from 2019 is Roger Stone's net worth now is $50,000.
That's what I saw too.
Now, again, how true this is one thing or another. Again, he claims to be broke, hence he's selling the stones, the Roger Infinity Stones. But there's a couple of lessons to take from this, right? More importantly, and this is hopefully a nice thing we can kind of enjoy for a minute on the show, and this is why I don't mind really digging into him and making fun of him during this trial and talking about the way he looks and he dresses and all these kinds of other weird affectations he has about them, is that he earned all of his money by doing the worst things possible, and it seems through his own shitty mismanagement has lost a lot of it. And so, again, usually when we get to the end of these kinds of programs, we talk about what punishment we would give them, and we can still get into that. I'm sure a lot of us have a very specific ideas of what we'd like to see Roger Stone do, but in a certain way, he fucking made his own bed, and now he has to go to prison in it. And, I don't know, there's maybe a somewhat hopeful quality here, not in the institutions of the system or whatever, being good at, sorting them out, but basically the idea is, they don't always get away with it. These motherfuckers do not always walk away smiling with a huge amount of money in their hands. Sometimes their disinhibition throws them so far, and their own stupidity and incompetence and weird sense of misfounded confidence in themselves is just collapses in their face, and they end up at the end of the day with nothing.
Why did that feel so good when you said that?
Well, what's so funny about that as well is in preparation for this a week ago, I rewatched for the first time since it came out the Get Me Roger Stone documentary, and he is so proud of himself, and he's so proud of his checkered past and of his reputation, and even the lobbying stuff. He has no shame in any bit of it. That movie came out I'm sure it was in production late 2016, early 2017, right after Trump had gotten elected, and so he is absolutely at his prime. You know what I'm saying? He is riding the wave of the new Trump administration, and to see just in the time between to watch that now and to see where he's at, or to watch that then and to see where he's at now, like you were saying, in such a short amount of time, to see that smug smile get wiped off his face, as potentially we said, by the time this episode is released, we might have a verdict, we'll see what happens of him.
And to be clear again, obviously the fact that, you know, one out of the many evil rich assholes in the world has like totally fucked up his life in a terrible way is not some valorization of like, oh, the system works, or you know, people get what they do and they're done. But I do think there's a concept, a theoretical concept that I like quite a bit about like the rehearsal for revolution, right? And the idea here is that like before you really have like a revolutionary moment or a certain kind of revolutionary energy, there are various events that happen before that give you a glimpse of what a really restorative justice might look like. And I think taking that lens to it as opposed to like a Dickensian morality tale of like, oh, he was greedy and so because of that he, you know, lost everything, but more looking at it in terms of like, here's an example of how these guys can go down. I think maybe there's something a little hopeful or aspirational in that idea.
I mean, we can come up with some Dickensian punishments. If that's helpful. If that's what you were trying to allude to, because I had some thoughts.
Well, you know, I just, you know, is Roger Stone is, you know, famously a known swinger. You know, I would just, maybe, you know, to have something in mind, sort of vaguely reminiscent of. You ever seen the film Autofocus about Bob Crane? You know this.
No.
You know the story of Bob Crane. Well, we'll just we'll leave it at that. Let the viewer use your own listener use your own imagination.
Do I have to look this up and see whether or not I have to cut this?
No, it's good. It's good.
Sure. Oh man. Look, here's the thing. Like, we will on this episode, like, there's no way that we're going to be able to encompass all of the fucking horror that this one psycho has brought onto the world and the working class. There's no way we'll ever cover it all. I mean, honestly, frankly, for anybody that's listening, like, I encourage you to look into it. Read the Torturers Lobby report. Like, understand how capital protects itself with these guys that are willing to uphold it at any cost. And frankly, and in the case of Roger Stone, especially as depicted in the Netflix documentary, relish in it, love it,
loves it,
are prideful of it. I mean, we didn't even get into the stuff. I mean, I have a whole thing here. There's an article from the Spectator USA entitled, "Has Mom Been Tested for STDs? The Manafort's Home Life and Why It Matters."
Oh, Jesus.
It's absolutely, I mean, look, whatever. Everybody's got their thing, whatever. But, like,
Yeah, don't kink shame him.
Yeah, exactly. No, but fuck him, but whatever.
I already did that with Roger Stone.
Yeah, no, but look, the apparatus of hair plugs and toupees that these guys have operated under for absolute decades, they're monsters.
Well, I mean, just to, you know, color Roger Stone's character a little bit, like you already mentioned, like, I mean, just look at who his role models and who his heroes are. Like, that tells you everything you got to know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is a man, like you said, like we said, like, traces like his political awakening to reading Barry fucking Goldwater's book as a child.
Oh,
Not only that, has a goddamn Richard Nixon tattoo famously on his back.
Yeah. If for whatever reason you have not seen the Nixon tattoo, Google it, look it up. Actually, I know what the
thumbnail for the show is gonna be.
But not only that, fucking like McCarthy era fucking vampire Roy Cohn, you know, was his early mentor in the 80s when he was first, you know, really getting involved.
Not to mention too Lee Atwater, who I wanted to get into, who is an associate and partner at Black Manafort and Stone.
Yes, it's a murderer's row of the most contemptible and fucking deeply evil figures in American political history, 20th century American history, and he is proud of his association with them and to call him his role models and friends.
It's Suicide Squad, but they buy Persian rugs to launder their money.
Okay, that's the punishment for them then. We gather all these guys up and we force them to fight like a witch in like a subterranean. Did you guys not even see the film? Fuck it, never mind.
I thought we were talking about. Are you talking about Us?
No,
the movie
no.
Us?
No. I'm saying like Stone, Manafort.
Yeah, we're not getting punished. We're fucking perfect
we're
saints.
No,
we're
the
good
movie
boys.
Us.
We're the good guys.
The movie.
Here,
No, not the movie
George...
Us. The movie Suicide Squad.
I never saw it.
Yeah, I
because
know,
I
I
heard it
never
sucked
saw it.
ass, and I'm very
Missing
impressionable.
Missing out.
I just watched Jurassic Park again instead of watching Suicide Squad.
Totally different genres.
I watched. I watched. You know what I watched the other night? I watched the Watchmen movie. I want to start watching the television show. Have you watched the television show?
I haven't seen the television show yet.
Wait, I thought those were the two. Well, there's one. Now, look, you're treading into really. I have no background on any of this comic book shit, and I assume it's some comic book shit.
Oh, I don't either.
But I thought
do.
the Watchmen. It was about some sort of. There was a blue man and then a guy that wore like a trench coat.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
it. You got it.
Sure, you got it.
Yeah,
Fucking
you got
nailed it, dude.
That's right. That's right.
huge dong as well on the blue guy.
And then that seems to be it. And then one guy was in prison, and the other one was a Billy Crudup, but he got like jacked or something. But he also died.
Enough of this. Enough of this. Enough of this.
Should we go back to closing our shows with ketchup?
Yeah, cut all of this.
No. Keep it all in. This is delightful.
I want people to recognize my ignorance of any comic book shit or any gamer culture. I do game. Every time I go to fill up my car, I try to get it to exactly $20.00. That's how I game. I want people to know that.
Well, look at Dwight having $20 to fill up his gas tank.
Mr. Aristocrat moving
Mr.
his
Big
second
Shot.
grand piano into his third living room over here with his fucking $20.
Yes, 48 cents. 48 cents on pump 3, please.
You know who could use $20 right about now? Roger Stone. I'll trade you my Roger Stone for a tank full of gas, please.
Look at this Rockefeller here using full serve gas stations. Oh God, what a weird episode.
Oh, it's fantastic, man.
I'm like staring at a picture of Paul Manafort's like bloated, like filler Botox face on my computer right now, and I'm just like, God, I'm so.
That's one of the funniest things about that documentary. If anybody ends up watching it or already has watched it, but they do interview Paul Manafort for it, and he's just like sedated like a fucking He's just so like the muscles on his face have not moved since he was lobbying for torture regimes in the 1980s, you know?
Well, that's the other satisfying thing is seeing that fucking smug piece of shit. Again, like think about the time period that this was made, like right when Trump had been elected, released soon after the inauguration, and to see these fucking pieces of shit then, and then to see just not even 3 years later, what's going on with him now.
Dude, I have to cut this in here, but my absolute favorite moment of Paul Manafort was he was asked, God, I can't remember exactly what it was, but he was asked by some reporter, like, hey, did you enlist the help of Russians or something like that did you do this thing? And
So to be clear, Mr. Trump has no financial relationships with any Russian oligarchs.
That's what he said. That's what I said. That's obviously what our position is.
Blows it, dude.
he just fucking word vomits.
The guiltiest person I've ever seen in my life.
Pukes out of fucking Scrabble words. Just it makes no fucking sense.
That's the other thing too. Again, like they're so obviously guilty, and like you were saying, they dress like fucking like a lineup of gangsters from like like the villains from Dick Tracy. You know, like they're just all wearing like zoot suits,
just absurd, like fucking half-inch wide pinstripe suits.
Yes.
With like a handkerchief with blood on it. So I'm like, hey, I didn't even know the guy. What are you talking about? Russians? I didn't talk to no Russians.
Hey, I was trying to lobby on behalf of the Petrocracy of Equatorial Guinea. Hey, come on down to K Street. And we got dollar oysters.
Just because a guy knows a couple of oligarchs, it means that he's some kind of bad guy.
Hey, I kept $750,000 in Crimea. Who knew I was gonna have to change the country code to call my bank?
Yeah, fucking Paulie Walnuts from The Sopranos could mount a better verbal defense of his illegal activities than these motherfuckers.
Well, it's just like I imagine like fucking like what I always used to. I imagine like you know that scene in the first Godfather when fucking Luca Brasi is like rehearsing.
Never seen it.
Shut the fuck up.
No, Shane, come on, please.
When he's
Never seen it.
you know what I'm talking about?
Get the fuck out of here.
Boring.
This day, it's an honor to be here on
Yes.
the day of your daughter's wedding. The day of your daughter's wedding. Yes. That's what I always picture when I see Manafort fucking stammering his way through defending himself against allegations of criminal activity.
I have a new punishment for them. Put them into one of the 1930s gangster films, but because of the moral code, all of those gangster films had to show that crime doesn't pay. So at the end of all of those movies, they would end up in some kind of big shootout. They would get knocked over in one way or another.
I thought you were going to say for their punishment, they have to go into those 1930s movies, but they all get polio. They all get scarlet fever.
Well, again, when looking back at The Godfather, for a reference here, perhaps Roger Stone should do the honorable thing and meet the same fate as Frank Pentangeli.
Frank Pentangeli?
Don't know the reference.
Fuck you guys.
Frank
You've seen The
Pentangeli.
Godfather. You've never seen The Godfather?
I turned it off because it was boring.
Shut the fuck up. Frank
Who's Frank?
Pentangeli
Was he the cop?
is the guy in The Godfather Part 2 at the end that has to testify against the family.
I'm too drunk by the end of the movie to know what's going on, man.
Oh,
You got to
come
talk about
on.
the first two scenes.
Come on. Fucking leave me hanging
I think
here.
maybe a more apt reference that some of our listeners may understand is that in Avengers Infinity War,
The fuck? I don't fucking
when
know.
Gamora is sacrificed
I don't
so
know
that
any of
Thanos
this
can
shit.
get the Soul Stone.
The fuck? I'm still trying to figure out, is this Guardians of the Galaxy? Is that the same thing
Dwight,
as what you're saying?
dude.
I don't know any of that shit. I've seen a superhero movie. No, wait, Jurassic Park's not a superhero movie.
Yes, it is.
Well,
Oh my god.
yeah, well, I think so. Wait, John Hammond.
John Hammond.
Yeah, he's not a superhero.
Didn't you just watch this?
Actually, by the way, nobody talks about this, but Sam Neill, who we've referenced before on the show, his Northern Irish accent, I think so. Well, I don't know if
Yeah,
made
we
the cut,
have.
But anyway, yeah, his Northern Irish accent makes it into Jurassic Park, because when the Ellie is trying to like hold the go into the Unix system, and he and Laura Dern are trying to keep the door closed, and he goes, "Ellie, the door locks." nobody, take a look.
The door locks. Ellie, boot up the door locks.
But he absolutely slips into his Northern Irish accent.
Well, who's the actor? Who's the actor? I can't. I'm drawing a blank on his name. But the guy who plays Mr. Orange in Reservoir Dogs, the guy who gets shot, the undercover cop. He's British. And
Tim Roth.
Yeah, I
Tim
was gonna
Roth.
say Tim Roth.
There's
Yeah.
several. There's several times in that movie where especially like there's a scene where he's telling that weird like fabricated story about the cops and the marijuana and all that stuff to like ingratiate himself to the gang or whatever. Like there's several times in that where he like slips into this very obvious British accent.
Oh,
It's just
yes.
like, I watched something like that and I
Yes.
just like is that the best take you got?
Oh, it was the best take for the budget they had. Yeah. Are we doing movie discourse?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I like
save
it.
it for
Keep going.
save it for Mr. Movies podcast, whatever the fuck that is.
Yeah, I have no fucking idea what that is. Is it not
It
real?
will not allow you to fucking denigrate the great name of Mr. Movies.
Is it not real? Is that the bit?
It will be.
Oh God, forget it.
So
Never mind.
please, yeah.
Anyway, Roger Stone.
No. I'm just gonna throw in a plug here at the end of the episode. Maybe, perhaps, who knows? By the time this episode's released, it might be a thing that exists. Please listen to Mr. Movies podcast featuring Mr. Movies.
Is this real? I don't pay. See, I miss all the good shit. Chris, you get all the good shit on Twitter. I'm just like I'm like Roger Stone. I'm a barnacle on the hull. I barely know this stuff. I just tweet about different Fed policies.
Statistics.
Let's wrap up.
Yeah. What are we
Let's
doing
wrap
here?
up, okay? Let's find, can we make some kind of grandstanding point?
Yes, if I can do that.
Okay, yeah.
I was able to get an advanced copy of Roger Stone's kind of last speech before he was going to be sentenced tomorrow.
Okay.
And he said, Your Honor, stay cool, folks.
Stay cool, everybody.
Roger Stone did nothing wrong, leave Roger Stone alone. Roger Stone did nothing wrong, leave Roger Stone alone. Bill Clinton went to the White House, helped himself to some chicks. Then Hillary intimidated